Good morning, everyone. I've got a separate. So, very quickly about myself. My name's Bob Kelly. I had a very fortunate career. I started with the U.S. Navy for 8 years, the last 4 with the White House doing systems administration for them, and then spent the next 10 as a deployment specialist with different government networks around the area. And over that time, I wrote some books on some scripting things and white papers for companies, like Microsoft and Wise and Install Shield. And that came from my founding appdeploy.com, which is what many of you probably know me for. I started that in 1999, and then that was acquired by Case. I went to work for them to do the community for Case. And then when they were acquired by Dell in 2010, I had the opportunity to build a development team and rewrite AppDeploy because it had gotten very old. I didn't know what I was doing when I wrote it. And then there was hundreds of thousands of people visiting every month, so I couldn't really take it. And so this is my 4th year here. I've had a pleasure to meet many of you. And I know last year when I came, IT Ninja was getting much better. And every month we've been updating it and making it better and better. And I think now most people agree they can find what they're looking for and not so painful anymore. For an agenda, I've done this packaging talk a few times over the years, and I've wanted to try to talk about something new, like maybe PowerShell, but I was told other people are already talking about PowerShell. We want you to talk about packaging. But it's hard to talk about packaging to people that know packaging, because I really don't want to tell you a bunch of things you already know. That's not a good way to spend your morning. So I'm going to start with a quick overview and some examples. I try to keep it real world. I came up with some challenges and solutions that many of you may know. Hopefully there's 1 or 2 things along the way that you see as a new solution to a problem. And then we'll talk about where things are headed. So I'm not going to talk about IT Ninja a whole lot, so I'll get it out of the way in the beginning because I think it's very important. This is a community. You guys all do packaging. You all share with one another. It's a very giving community when it comes to people finding the solution to a problem and then saying, hey, here's how you do it, and just sharing that. And that's not common everywhere. I think it's really good to see. And knowing that you're not the first person to try to automate the installation and turn off the automatic updates and do all the difficult things with the application deployment you're working on, chances are not only has someone done it before you, but that they've shared what they did on IT Ninja, and you can benefit from that knowledge. One of the things that we did when we updated that area of the site is now when anyone goes to submit a tip, they're asked to answer a couple of questions. They're optional, but they'll answer what kind of package is it, and how did they deploy it, and you'll say how hard you think it was. And by collecting that from everyone that shares a tip, we hope that you get a nice overview of any title's version to see what's the most common setup type people are saying this is, because sometimes you can get it different ways. And what's the most commonly used deployment method? Maybe this one, everybody uses MST. Maybe this one, everybody is virtualizing it. So you'll be able to see what people are doing most. And then finally, with the difficulty rating, being able to get an average of how difficult a package is can be very helpful when it comes to your customers saying, well, how long is this one going to take, and how long are these 10 going to take? Being able to go to a resource that you've all contributed to that says, this one is very easy, this one is very hard, you can kind of try to gauge how long it's going to take you based on that information. So just a quick look at what that form looks like. When you enter your tip, you can pick from the different choices and like what type of method you use to deploy it. Hopefully I have them all covered. The site's also very heavily based on feedback. What happens to the site and the regular updates that are done is heavily influenced by feedback. So if, for example, I'm missing something, you do it a different way, and it should be added, please do let me know. And then the result is across the top above all the deployment tips that are contributed, the most common reported type, most common deployment method, and then that difficulty rating. I wanted to kind of talk about terminology just for a second, because everybody kind of refers to things differently when it comes to packaging. Some people say packaging and repackaging and scripting all as the same thing. And there's some distinction, and I think when you're talking about packaging, it's good to know who the person talking, what they mean. And what I mean by packaging is assembling whatever assets are necessary to automate the deployment of the application the way you want it. So that could be a script, it could be a command line, it could be an answer file, just all the things that you need. Whereas repackaging is taking that setup and breaking it down, reverse engineering it into the setup that you want, either because you couldn't get it out of what was provided by the vendor, or because you just want to have total control over it. We'll go over some pros and cons, of course. Silent installation. Most every software product today can be silently installed right out of the box without having to get too deep into uncovering things nobody's done before. Most of the part, Windows installer packages, almost everything's a Windows installer package now. There's a few exceptions, but some obvious examples that everyone's probably very familiar with. But then when it comes to custom solutions, even those are mostly Windows installer packages, but the vendor's taken the extra step to say, okay, we realize that just what comes out of the box isn't probably good enough. Just because you know you can create a transform file doesn't mean you know all the things that you could control with that transform file. So Microsoft Office and Adobe's released their customization wizard to expose all that stuff so that you don't have to dig and read and figure it all out, just to make it easier. But underneath, there's still Windows installer packages. And then there's some that are just still just basic support. So good examples are a lot of things coming from Microsoft, and you'd say, well, why? If Microsoft says Windows installer is required, everyone's going to do it, and everyone does do it, how come they still don't do it for Internet Explorer and Windows Media Player? And the key reason is that you can't update system-protected files with the Windows installer package. So you can sometimes get, like with the HKEY, you could make a Windows installer package that you could deploy, but really it's just calling out a wrapper to run a legacy setup. Public properties, I mean, this is one of the best things about Windows Installer is for all us guys that like the command line switches, setup.exe/quiet or /what, that's pretty much what you get when it comes to a command line. Maybe you can say, don't pop up the end user license agreement, or don't reboot my computer. But the number of things that were allowed by even vendors that were thinking people were going to be deploying this silently didn't have 50 things that you could put on that command line. But with Windows installer properties, there can be any number of different things that you can control. The problem is it's still a puzzle. So IT Ninja becomes a great source to be able to go and find out what public properties are available and what properties do what. Here, just to accept the end user license agreement, I quickly found these 5 different ways people are referring to it. I mean, in the end, it's still going to be a Boolean value. So it's either going to be true or false, or 1 or 0, or yes or no. I mean, that much is the same. But what that property is named and exactly what it does, I mean, It's pretty self-explanatory if you know what you're looking for, that these all address the end-user license agreement for you. But often, this is even a required parameter. So you try to do a silent installation, it fails because you didn't agree to the license agreement, and then you have to go figure out what that property is. So what properties exist? This is one of those things I'll put in the obvious category that most of you already know, so I'll go through it quick. But just look at the property table. The property table is going to have a list of all the existing properties and its default value. They're usually named in such a way that you can tell what they do or get a good idea of it. And of course, you could always dig in deeper, take a closer look at the MSI for conditions to see what other values might be controlling things. And I neglected to point out earlier, I've got a URL at the bottom of each of these pages, almost all of them, linking to something relevant. So when you get this deck later and you're looking at it, hopefully those links will take you to something helpful. In this case, the link is to an article I wrote about installing Orca. Orca is a free table editor from Microsoft, but it's actually very hard to get. You can't just download it. You have to download an SDK, and then there's a specific feature that you can install that has it in there, and then you have to go find it in the directory after the install. So I spelled that out, and there will be a bunch of these links on the different pages of the slides. Talking about Orca, I also felt compelled to point out a great alternative to Orca that you can just download very simply without going through a lot of hassle. It's called Instead from a very small company that just makes this one product, an individual actually. And their free version is a good replacement for Orca, and then they have a fairly inexpensive Plus edition that adds some additional benefits. I've spent tons of time in the past, whole presentations just talking about the pros and cons of packaging, should you repackage or not repackage, and really there is no answer, so that's always just a big conversation about what ifs and maybe for you, maybe for you. In the end, you know, how many people here repackage all their setups and don't even use a command line, always repackage? Nobody at all. That's a big change. For a long time, people, because they had to repackage most of their applications, because they weren't all coming as Windows installer packages, it felt better to just have everything be a repackaged Windows installer package, so that you could do checks for conflicts and reports and just know what was in all of your packages. But the command line support's gotten much better. Windows installer is pretty much a standard for almost everyone today, so the need for repackaging has certainly gone down. Obviously, on the complexity of repackaging can be something that requires some skills, as most of you know or have probably learned the hard way in the beginning. You know, if you include the wrong things, that can get you in trouble. If you leave things out, that can get you in trouble. And then vendor support. You know, if you're calling someone up and saying, "Hey, this application isn't working the way it's supposed to work," don't tell them that you reverse engineered their setup and sent it to 1,000 machines, because they're not going to like that, and they'll largely blame whatever problem you're having on the fact that you did that. You know, they provided a setup, they expected it to be installed that way, and you don't know exactly what logic was in it. In that case, you'd have to install it properly on a machine, reproduce the problem, and then hopefully they would talk to you. Repackaging MSI setups is something that you always hear, never repackage a Windows installer setup, and because you don't need to. And it's true that you don't need to. It already is an MSI, so why repackage the MSI? I think the reason a lot of people do it is because it's easier to just do another repackage after you've done it so many times than it is to try to figure out how to make a transform file that will change it to the way you want. That is usually more challenging to get an MST that does everything you need it to. But I've always been frustrated early on when people would say, well, why not? Well, it's against Microsoft best practices. It's against best practices. And that's just such a generic thing to say it's against best practices. You're not telling me why. So I've got a list of reasons. I won't read through them all. But basically, it's true. You shouldn't do it. It's a good reason that it's against best practices, because it's the type of thing that will get you in trouble. If you need an MSI, and it already is one, you're going to have to fight the transform file and get it working the way it's intended to work in order to be able to apply updates and new versions and patches from the vendor in the future, because all the GUIDs change when you repackage it, and any number of logic can be lost along the way. MSI Wrappers. Like I said, there's the error in 1931. If you try to update a system-protected file, you'll be stopped, and you should probably only see this if you've repackaged something that shouldn't be repackaged into an MSI. But excuse me, a few examples are the Flash player. It's included and hidden. A lot of times, you won't even know that you're running a Windows installer or a legacy package because it's been wrapped in a Windows installer like this. And I went over some of these examples earlier. It was mostly something that people wanted for command line installs so that they could deploy using group policy, because group policy only lets you use a Windows installer package. These great command lines don't help me if I don't have a systems management solution that lets me make use of it. And so the Windows installer wrappers became something that a lot of people were doing, but then not so much. So because not very many people are relying on group policy to handle all of their deployments these days, we have less of a need for it, to the extent that this product, this Windows installer wrapper wizard, disappeared. And I wrote the author of it and asked if I could put it on IT Ninja for people, and he agreed. So at that URL there, you can go and download this. It's a free tool, and it's just a wizard that takes you through what's your command line for install, what's your command line for uninstall, and it handles the building of the custom actions for you, so that and the inclusion of the files necessary, so that you can have your own MSI wrapper if you need it. So like I said, I didn't want to just risk telling you a whole bunch of things you knew. So I came up with a couple of scenarios that we could talk through with multiple solutions to each. And I like it when there's multiple solutions, because then you have choice. In some cases, for some people, one solution is better than another. So we'll talk through these here. The first one is you're deploying your application, and it conflicts with something that's running. Not necessarily conflicts. Sometimes the setup will stop and tell you, like in some of these screenshots, hey, we're not going to continue the install because such and such is running. Other times, it will mean that because the file's locked, in order for the installation to complete, now it's going to have to reboot. So if you had handled stopping the application in the first place, then the file wouldn't be locked and you wouldn't have had to do the reboot. So it's definitely an ideal situation not to have to run your installer with other things running. And there's obviously a few ways to handle that. One is task kill. You can specify a product ID, or you can give it a name. So in the case of Internet Explorer, there's usually multiple processes running. So by giving it the name, it'll kill them all. And there's several command line switches to control the behavior, of course. But you could definitely risk upsetting some users. So if you're doing this during the day and your setup needs to run and it can't have the browser going, then just killing the browser is probably going to make you an unpopular person. So another solution is desktop alerts. A lot of deployment solutions today have the ability to either allow the user to snooze or delay or a prompt before the install. Some have a pre and post installation message so that you can explain to the user what's going on. And in my research for third-party solutions, I found one company, SnapComms, that is a technology company that specializes in these things. They've got desktop alerts and desktop scrolling messages and different ways to get information out to your company. I don't know if it's any good. Has anybody used it? I don't know if it's any good, so I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying that it's out there. There's if this solution that you have doesn't provide the capability of snoozing or alerting the user, then that's certainly another way to go. But probably the best one, if you have the capability, and you probably do, is to just run it log off or shutdown. In SCCM, you can say only run when no user is logged on, so the browser is not going to be running. And in case, a similar execute while user is logged off. And then for GPOs, you could use the log off or shutdown script. The log off script is going to be running as the user, though, so the shutdown script is most likely the one you're going to be after if what you're doing is affecting the machine. But it seems obvious once you hear the solution, but I've seen people just kill themselves trying to figure out how can I stop the browser from running so I can update Java, and just don't do it while they're logged on. Don't fight trying to handle every scenario and risk users losing work and becoming upset. Another kind of regular challenge that we deal with is deploying to HKEY current user. This is a topic I see come up on IT Ninja regularly, where I need to get this registry key out to all the users. How do I do that? So there's a couple ways to do that. One, of course, is logon script. That's going to run as the user, so HKEY current user is going to be available. This example here is in batch. Hopefully, your logon script isn't batch. That can get pretty ugly, but the general logic here applies no matter what language you're using, and that is to check to see if it needs to be done before you do it. Don't just do it forever, which is the main drawback of doing something like this in the logon script, is you don't know when everybody has it done if you don't have an inventory for it or some logic behind knowing what percentage of your systems have had this applied. So it has to be there and check forever. One better way to go, but definitely more complicated, is to leverage the self-healing capability of the Windows installer. If you set your HKEY user component as a main feature of an MSI as a key path, then when an advertised shortcut is run, it will see it's missing, it'll kick off the repair, and the user will have it. So the big benefit there is you only are applying it to the people that need it because it's for this application. You have it all together. The downside, of course, is the user has to wait a few seconds, and users don't like to wait a few seconds. So another possibility, depending on your environment. And then active setup. How many people have used active setup? A good number of people. That's good. How many people have heard of it, never used it? Almost everybody. Wow. It's great. It's one of those things that I didn't know to take advantage of, and I was doing it all the hard way. But the idea, for those of you that just didn't feel like raising your hand and being the two people who didn't know, the active setup just is built into the system. It's comparing HKEY local machine value against the HKEY current user value, and if it doesn't see that it matches and exists, it kicks off the specified command. So just like that logon script scenario, we were seeing, hey, did this run? If it didn't, then run it. That's built right into this registry capability of active setup. So the default value in the subkey is the name of the job. You can give it a version so that next time you change it, you don't have to create a new name. You could just update the version, and it will check to see if that matches as the condition to see if it should run. And then the stub path value is just a command line to be executed. And that could be a script, it could be whatever package, or just a command line, and it will run that directly, whatever it is. And as an example, I gave it active setup test for a name, and you can see that shows up in this dialog that pops up. The only time you probably usually see this, or used to see it, is the first time you launched Windows, because there was a bunch of things in active setup that had to happen. But usually, it'll run fast enough during the logon process that the user won't even see it. As an example, to see it work and see what it looks like, you could give it something like Notepad, because it's going to launch the process, and then it's not going to continue until that process is completed. So Notepad will pop up and sit there until you close it, and then you have the opportunity to see this dialog and look at the registry and see what's going on. Another big problem that most of us deal with is trying to figure out how to disable application updates. You want to control what's the latest version on all the systems. You want to QA it first and make sure it works in your environment, and then you want to roll it out. Even if you didn't care to make sure everybody was on the same version, you have the restriction of the user not having the permissions to do the update. So in most scenarios, in most corporate environments that you guys are managing, of course, you don't want those automatic updates. You need to figure out how to turn them off by default. And sometimes that's a command line switch, sometimes it's a property, sometimes it's a settings file you can manipulate. But there's no standard. So it's another one of those things like what's the name of a property. If the feature exists, where is it and how do I control it is different between each vendor, each application, each version. It could always change even within that narrow configuration. So looking at hundreds of applications that you have to deal with, or maybe dozens that have this type of functionality, you have to dig and figure out what each one is. This is a popular topic on IT Ninja, so usually you can go there and find what people have done to be able to turn it off and automate this. And then the other thing you can do, of course, is monitor the application to see what's changing. So if you have your snapshot tool for repackaging, that can be one way to do it. Launch your before snapshot, make your settings change, and then do your after snapshot and see what changed. Sometimes that can help you narrow it down, but I think that's not always going to do it, because it could be more complicated than that, as you know, with some of the things you might have worked with, like Firefox. Really has that type of functionality buried in a configuration file that's copied to the user, and it gets very complicated. Most of the time, if you're just looking for it and you're hoping to find something that's named appropriately and you can see it's called disabled updates and it has a value of 0, you could change it to 1. That seems pretty obvious if you know where to look, and in most cases that's going to be in the app data directory of the user profile, and then if it's in the registry, which is becoming less and less common, you all know, I'm sure, current user software name and then the application name, and again, hopefully that value is named in a way that you can understand. A very good way to find out what's going on is Process Monitor. It used to be, there was a file monitor program and a registry monitor program, and they merged them together quite a few years ago and added more capabilities. It's still being updated. It's still getting better and doing more. And it's a very, very powerful tool that if you spend some time with it and start figuring out how it works, you can watch what's going on your system to a very detailed degree, to the extent that it catches so much that it can be overwhelming. But there's some very good filter capabilities that I'll get into. But some of the things that can help you figure out is, if there's an error happening, you can see exactly what's causing the error, what the error is, where it's looking. If it's trying to do something and it can't do it, if it's looking for something and it can't find it, if there's a permission error, all these things are capable of being captured by Process Monitor. Then you can see exactly where was it trying to go, exactly what was calling it, and what was happening at the time. So I had thought about doing a live demo of Process Monitor. I decided that was really just asking for trouble. So this is just a screenshot. How many people have have not used Process Monitor? Almost everybody's had their hands on it. It's, like I said, a very, very powerful tool. So when you're in here, you can right-click on anything and say, exclude this from my filter or include this in my filter. So you can start narrowing things down by result. If you know it's a failure, then you can exclude everything that's a success, and that will shrink the list. If you know that it's the process name is the application that you're working with, in this case, Lightroom, you can include only that process, and you can start narrowing the list down. But I've come up with a handful of tips for using it. The first thing is to make sure that you start your capture before you launch the program, and then do whatever it is you're going to do, and then close the program, and then stop your snapshot process. I think because it captures so much and there's so much noise that gets in that, there's a tendency to try to just capture the minimal amount so that there's less to deal with. But even when you only run it for a few seconds and you try to be as tight as you can, there's still thousands and thousands of things happening that are being captured. So don't worry about capturing too much. It's better to catch too much. You'd rather have captured too much so that what you're looking for is in there than to try to potentially trim that out. There's also, if you were to try to focus, maybe you did it a couple of times and you're still not finding it, there's a little icon at the top there that looks like a target, and you can drag that onto a control or form. So if it's a dialog, you can actually drag it right to the checkbox on the form. It'll highlight it, and when you let go, the process monitor will focus only on that process in that area, and maybe help you find what you're looking for a little harder. Including, excluding, filters are your friend in Process Monitor. So filter, 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 and then if you say, oh crap, now there's nothing left, I can't find what I'm after, there's always a reset. So you're not deleting anything, it's just a filter, so don't be afraid to filter away. And then when you're searching, by default it's only searching from where you are down, or you can change the radio button to where you are up, and then you're doing 2 searches. So I always say, if you're searching for something, scroll to the top, select that top entry, and then do your search down so that you're sure to be capturing everything. And then when you're searching for things and you don't find what you're after, like if we're in this scenario where we're trying to stop automatic updates, you might search for update and not find anything. You might search for check, because it's checking for updates. Or if you can't find it with full words like that, then often things are abbreviated. So config goes down to CFG, preferences goes down to pref. It's just like the skills you've developed searching Google for answers. You have to get less and less specific and use less and less specific terms to uncover what you're looking for sometimes. And then to monitor in a virtual layer, because of the nature of application virtualization, you can end up not capturing some information because it's hidden inside that bubble. So one good way to do that with AppV is just create a shortcut to Process Monitor in your virtual package, and when you run it, it will then be in that context, and you'll see what you're looking for. One of the biggest challenges that we face packaging all the time is the registry. It just complicates things. So to set that up, some things that, some worlds where the registry isn't an issue. One are Mac applications. In most cases, a Mac application, not all the time. Sometimes there's a setup to run a quick wizard, usually the ones Microsoft made, because that's how they do things. But most applications you get are really just, it looks like just an application app, a .app file with an icon, and the setup is actually just to drag it to the right folder. So this is the installation for Skype. You run this DMG, which is basically a zip, an archive file, and it just shows you, okay, here's the app, and here's a shortcut to your applications folder, and the setup process is for the user to drag it in, let go, and now it's installed. So very, very simple. Mobile software is another example of new software and updates are very, very easy. They focus toward the user now. So it's they're not looking at it as that's the admin's problem. We can make it super complicated, and they'll be happy because they can charge more and have job security. Now people are doing it themselves, so it's starting to get very, very easy. Another example is the Windows Store apps. They don't use a registry. They're very self-contained, and it basically works just like a mobile application with these AppX packages. You have some control over PowerShell, which is nice, but it's still rather hidden. But the idea here is that it is very simple. Of course, this is just targeting Windows Store apps, the ones that run in that new touch interface. As you know, if you're dealing with a desktop application, a Windows installer package is still going to be the way to go, and I think will be for some time. Another example that Chris Jackson showed us yesterday morning was that you could just rename app vpackage, and it's a zip, and you can go inside and see, just like the Mac example that I showed earlier, it's one file and everything it needs is hidden inside that one archive. So we're seeing more and more examples of that where an installation really can just be a file copy, and you don't have to worry about stepping on other applications or shared resources. Anybody not know what application virtualization is? Some pros and cons. Of course, to be able to stream the application updates, and streaming is a separate technology that gets kind of attached to application virtualization a lot, but really that's the delivery mechanism. And it can apply to non-virtualized applications. It's just not as common. But the idea of being able to have a gold image that has just what you want, just what you've tested, maybe a couple of applications that everybody has, like Office, but then all your other applications can potentially be just shortcuts to the virtual package, so that you don't have to keep updating your image every time there's a new version of something. Users don't have to go through an installation process because it just happens very quickly. And you can usually just update that one source, and everybody gets the update the next time they run it. So a lot of potential benefits to application virtualization from a image management standpoint. Cons, not everything can be packaged. So as a virtual application, there are still some limitations. It's been getting better over the years, but those limitations still do exist. There's a lack of standards. It's kind of a black box. So if you create a package and it doesn't work, it can be very difficult sometimes to figure out what went wrong and what you need to change. Again, a lack of vendor support, because you're back in the repackaging game where you're not running the application the way the vendor intended, and they're going to have trouble supporting that for you. So some looking ahead, I think some things are going to change over time. One big one is that our users are much more tech savvy. So they know how to do things. They're used to doing things themselves. They're more used to finding solutions to problems themselves and not just calling the help desk. A couple generations ago, it was, I can't print. And that would be somebody's day, is just answering I can't print problems. And now people have fought problems at home and are more used to the kind of the self-help scenario. And of course, the world is more and more computer friendly. Computer's not a weird thing to have like it once was. Everybody has one, and everybody's used to dealing with things. So I think what I've been leading up to is the fact that I think that deployment has become less and less of a factor going forward. So it's already, on all these different scenarios I just went through, very easy to install an application and to get updates. The user can do it themselves even, and it's often a single file that one has to deal with. So as deployment becomes less and less a complicating factor, what's going to happen to your role? If you're a deployment specialist and deployment is getting easier and easier and easier, things are changing. So I've been trying to look ahead and see, particularly from IT Ninja's standpoint, to remain relevant, where is this all headed? So I think what's going to happen is we'll become more of a software specialist versus a deployment specialist, because there's still many things that can be difficult. Opinion, what software is best, or I don't like this application I'm using, what's a good alternative to it? Your ability to deal with a bunch of different platforms, because this whole BYOD, people bringing their own computers, often means bring your own operating system. And now you're having to deal with multiple mobile and desktop operating systems. So I think it's more and more important that as a software specialist, you have some familiarity with as wide a range of scenarios as possible, so that you can help people with their decisions, help people with their problems. And I think that's a big change, because we're used to coming from a world where everybody is the same because that's how you made it, and they're unable to affect change on that. Application management is another piece of what I think a software specialist would be responsible for. I'm sure, how many people here, in addition to packaging, also are primarily the one responsible for license management, reporting? These things are tied together very, very tightly, and it makes sense, because hey, you're the application guy. How many did you deploy? How many people are using it? Identifying and preventing waste saves the company money, and it makes you very valuable to the team to be able to do that. Establishing corporate standards is another key area in application management, where, are there default configuration settings for this application? Should they be enforced? How do you do that? There's new tools becoming available. Again, they can often be application specific. What can be controlled, what can be enforced, and how to go about it is another set of puzzles around each application. So as an application expert, I think configuration management, product selection, knowing where to look, having a good wide familiarity, and being a gateway for updates as well, so that it doesn't happen often, but there will definitely be times, and you probably experienced it, where a new update comes out and it doesn't work. It's a bad update, and people are going to be upset if they apply that update. So you can't blindly just take the vendor's latest and keep pushing it out without checking. And as we get into a scenario where people are doing that themselves, I think it becomes more important for you as the application expert, the software specialist, to be the one that gets it first and sees, does it have any ill effects, before you go ahead and give the green light through whatever mechanism for the rest of the organization. I think this change towards what is going to be a replacement of Windows installer. Everything's going to be a simpler single file copy scenario. We've been headed in that direction for a long time, but it's definitely happening slowly, and it's going to happen even more slowly in the corporate world. And as we see things go to a touch interface and become simpler, it seems like, well, AppX will be, all the packages will be AppX packages, and there'll be no more Windows installer packages. But I don't see that happening for a very, very long time, just due to the level of detail and complexity in some of the applications that we use on the desktop. They're just not touch-friendly. And to be made touch-friendly, or to be a new UI for that, would be super complicated, because some applications just do so much. Like Photoshop is a good example, or Adobe Creator Suite. Those products are very, very complex, and just aren't going to ever lend themselves to a simple couple buttons and sliders, and everybody's happy. So even in the times when everything seems to be going that way, there's still going to be desktop applications, and I imagine they'll be managed in much the same way we do today. So IT Ninja is preparing for that. One of the The more difficult changes that I made was giving up the name appdeploy.com. It had a good brand, a good reputation, and changing that was definitely not easy. But just like the name of this event is going to be changing to something more generic, it's necessary because you don't want to be pigeonholed to just be this piece of the conversation. It's a bigger conversation. So the way this is being established is to say IT Ninja is a software community for IT pros. So, what do your peers think about this application or that application? If you go to the App Store, you're going to see who knows whose opinion. The idea is that at IT Ninja, they're IT pros, and they care about the things you care about, and their ratings and their opinions will matter more to you than just some home user saying something. So that's one aspect. Another is being able to share more kinds of tips about software. So we have this big database. There's 300,000 different revisions of different software titles in the database, and it's going to be growing. It's also going to be getting cleaned up for those of you that know that number is inflated because there's duplicates out there. The idea is that for every company, we'll have every product, and for every product, we'll have every version, and then there would be the place for you to share any relevant tips. So whereas it used to just be focused on application deployment, you can now share virtualization tips or actual script code or registry tweaks to configure the product or turn off those automatic updates and things. So it's well poised to be able to adapt to what you need it to become. And like I said, feedback is a big, important part of the direction being followed in terms of where IT Ninja goes. We're doing updates every month now, and what we deem as the most important things are those things that will be happening next. So please keep feedback coming. And that is the session code for your evaluations. And I think, thank you. Thanks. Do we have any black belts in the house? One. And you're on, Rock? Okay, come by the booth. I've got 2 hats, so I'm glad there's 2 black belts, so I can give you an IT Ninja hat. One of the things we do at IT Ninja to try to make it fun is you get points for anything you do on the site, whether you're submitting something or answering a question or even just rating something, you get some points. And as those points accumulate, you move up in rank. And at different milestones, you get prizes. We send out, even all around the world, we send stickers at one level, and there's stickers I have at the Dell software booth. And then the next level, there's a T-shirt we'll send you. And then if you get to black belt, which isn't easy, so it's nice to see we've got a couple here. We have an actual black belt we send out with the IT Ninja logo embroidered in it, and it's in a nice plastic case, like a little trophy. So if you're using the site but you never created an account, I encourage you to create an account so that even the rating and things you are already doing can start slowly accumulating some points, so you can have some fun with it. Thanks.